Imagine this. Everything you know about human history, the rise of agriculture, the birth of writing, the first cities, is a lie told to keep you calm. Now imagine the truth is far older, far darker, and far more fragile than anyone dares to admit. Because buried beneath our world is evidence that humanity did not rise once. It rose 7 times, and 6 times it was erased. The first clue does not come from mythology or legend, it comes from the ground itself. And it arrives like a warning. Out of nowhere, monumental architecture appears fully formed. No prototypes, no evolution, no training period, just perfect engineering dropped into the timeline like a stone into quiet water. Ancient calendars predict celestial cycles with uncanny accuracy. Megaliths align with stars as if built by people who had watched the sky for thousands of years. But according to the official story, these builders were barely out of the Stone Age. That story does not hold. Step too close to the edges of accepted history, and the floor begins to break. In the deserts, ruins stand with no culture to claim them. In the mountains, stones are cut with impossible precision. Beneath the oceans, cities lie arranged in perfect geometry. And under layers of earth older than civilization, objects appear that should not exist at all, pieces of technology sealed in strata where only nature should be. Before we go any deeper, I would love to know where you are listening from and what hour keeps you company tonight. And as always, the visuals you see are simply guides for the imagination, not requirements for the journey. Thank you for being part of this with us. Now let us step forward. The deeper you go, the more violent the fractures become. Researchers try to explain them misdated, misinterpreted, misunderstood. But the anomalies keep coming, and they all whisper the same thing: something existed before the cultures we know. Something powerful, something organized, something that ended abruptly and left almost nothing behind except questions no one wants to answer. What could erase an entire civilization so completely that not even its name survives? Fire alone cannot do it. Floods alone cannot do it. Ice cannot do it. Darkness cannot do it. But a sequence of all 4, a world reset, triggered by forces older than humanity, that can. It has happened before. Not once, not twice, but 6 times. Imagine for a moment that our world is not a straight line but a cycle. Civilizations rise, climb, flourish, then collapse so violently that memory itself shatters. Survivors scatter into forests, mountains, and caves, carrying fragments of a knowledge they no longer understand. When the world stabilizes again, their descendants build anew, believing they are the beginning, when in truth they are only the aftermath. Suddenly the myths make sense. The flood stories, the sky fire stories, the wandering survivors. The gods who teach humanity skills it should not yet possess. These are not fantasies. They are trauma memories passed from mouth to mouth, across thousands of years, echoes of a world lost in an instant. If this is true, then we live in the 7th civilization. And the evidence of the 6 before us still flickers beneath oceans, under deserts, inside mountains, and even in our own DNA. Evidence that no government or institution wants to bring into the light, because the moment they do, the world will understand the truth: we are not at the peak of human progress. We are standing on the ruins of ages that rose higher than we dare imagine. And if 6 worlds fell before ours, the next question is unavoidable. Why did they fall? And what is waiting for us in the shadows of the next cycle? The deeper we look into the forgotten layers of our world, the more something unexpected begins to reveal itself. Not through legends or symbolic stories, but through the stubborn physical evidence that refuses to cooperate with the official timeline. When the earth is opened, and when ancient stone gives way to what should not be there, the narrative we learned in school begins to feel painfully incomplete. Every science begins with anomalies. Most anomalies are eventually explained, but a few remain stubborn, A few sit like sharp stones in the smooth narrative of history, impossible to ignore and even harder to explain away. These are the out-of-place artifacts, the strange creations buried in geological layers far older than any known human craft. They are small things at first glance, fragments and metal pieces and machined surfaces. Yet each one whispers a possibility few dare to consider. Someone before us reached a level of knowledge we assume belongs only to the modern age. Take, for instance, the metal cubes and gears found sealed inside ancient rock. Some are discovered in coal seams hundreds of millions of years old. Coal forms slowly under pressure from plants that lived long before human beings ever appeared. And yet within these seams workers have pulled out metallic objects with flat surfaces and machined edges. No natural force creates perfect symmetry. No geological pressure forms right angles. Someone made them. Then there are the tools encased in stone. Hammers with iron heads of purity no forge in the 19th century could achieve, found locked inside Cretaceous limestone. Brass cups embedded in geodes that took millions of years to form. Spark plug-like components trapped in volcanic ash, hundreds of thousands of years older than our species. These are not errors of dating. The surrounding material is dated by multiple unrelated methods. The geological context is clear. The objects do not belong where they are found. Mainstream explanations offer contamination or hoax. And sometimes contamination is real. But when the pattern repeats across continents and time periods, when the metallurgical analysis reveals alloys too advanced for their supposed age, and when entire reports vanish from public records, it becomes difficult to believe that coincidence accounts for everything. A pattern begins to form, faint but undeniable. This pattern grows sharper when we look beneath the oceans. Sonar readings reveal perfect linear grids underwater where no civilization should have been. Divers discover blocks fitted with precision, stone terraces arranged in geometric patterns, and channels carved as if by machines. Official statements call these formations natural, but nature does not carve 90-degree intersections across mile-wide platforms. Nature does not shape harbour walls aligned to astronomical markers. The earth remembers in fragments. A gear tooth here, a machined cup there, a drowned staircase descending into darkness. They feel like remnants from a world erased, a world that left behind traces small enough to escape the cataclysm that destroyed it, but strong enough to survive tens of thousands or even millions of years. Yet the most difficult part of all this is not the artifacts. It is the reaction to them. Universities publish a brief note, then retract it. Museums store the objects in back rooms without catalogue numbers. Laboratories declare the sample lost. Government agencies lock newly discovered sites behind restricted zones with explanations that do not match the scale of the operation. The pattern of disappearance mirrors the pattern of discovery. This leads to a question many researchers fear to ask. Why would anyone want to suppress evidence of ancient technology? One answer is simple inconvenience. These objects threaten the accepted timeline, and institutions built around that timeline resist revision. Another answer is more unsettling. If earlier civilizations possessed technology equal to or beyond our own, and if their collapse was sudden and total, then our sense of stability is an illusion. What happened to them could happen to us. That realization is harder to accept than a misdated artifact. As we move deeper into this investigation, the question shifts from could ancient civilizations have been advanced to how advanced were they? And more importantly, what destroyed them? In the next part, we will explore the idea that human history may not be linear at all, but cyclical, shaped by forces that rise and fall over spans longer than any written record. It is within those vast stretches of lost time that the evidence of entire ages may be hiding. Under the surface of the familiar story of humanity, there lies a timeline that refuses to stay quiet. It shows itself in scattered fragments, in unexplained anomalies, and in memories that appear across different cultures as if carried from a single forgotten source. When viewed together, these pieces begin to form a pattern, one that suggests civilization is not a slow, gradual climb, but a repeating wave, a rise, a fall, a silence, and then a rise again. Our textbooks present human progress as a straight line beginning around 12,000 years ago, with the first cities, the first laws, the first organized faith, the first written symbols etched into clay and stone. But the earth itself is older than all written memory, and it keeps a different kind of record. Ice cores, deep ocean sediments, fossilized pollen, ancient shorelines, glacial scarring, extinct river systems all whisper the same quiet possibility. The world may have hosted not one but many eras of complexity long before ours. What makes this possibility compelling is the rhythm found in nature. Earth is not static, it tilts, it wobbles, it breathes heat and cold in cycles. Ice sheets march forward and then retreat. Sea levels fall and then surge upward again by hundreds of feet. Volcanic ash blankets continents. Comets scatter debris across the sky. Each time the planet shifts dramatically, enough life reorganizes itself. Civilizations rise on stable ground, thrive for a time, and then collapse when the stability breaks. If there were lost cultures before us, their ruins would not sit neatly on open plains waiting to be discovered. They would lie beneath oceans where coastlines once existed. They would be buried under layers of volcanic ash and compressed sediment. They would sleep under glaciers. They would hide beneath deserts that were once lush grasslands. And in many places that is exactly what we find. Geologists speak of abrupt climate transitions every 90 to 100,000 years. Biologists map population bottlenecks that nearly erased early humanity. Archaeologists quietly acknowledge the strange gaps in the progression of toolmaking, agriculture, and architecture. One moment our ancestors are simple hunter-gatherers. The next moment, megalithic structures appear that require mathematics, astronomy, and engineering knowledge far beyond anything that should exist at the time. Some researchers propose natural explanations for these leaps. Others propose that the timeline is simply incomplete. But a third possibility exists, one far more difficult to confront. What if earlier civilizations reached levels of knowledge and complexity similar to ours, or perhaps beyond ours, and then were erased by global upheavals so total that only fragments remained? Fragments too scattered to rebuild a narrative, but too persistent to ignore. Stories from ancient cultures everywhere speak of great floods, of darkness lasting years, of cities swallowed by the sea, of fire falling from the sky, of survivors wandering into new lands carrying only memory and fragments of knowledge. These stories are treated as myth, but myth often grows from truth. When the same story appears in hundreds of places separated by oceans and language families, it becomes harder to dismiss the shared core as coincidence. The deeper we travel into the forgotten timeline, the more another pattern emerges. Civilization seems to rise quickly after each collapse, as if guided by lingering memories or inherited instincts. Skills appear fully formed. Mathematics re-emerges. Calendars synchronize with celestial cycles. Stonework returns with a precision that astonishes modern architects. It is as though humanity is not inventing from nothing but rediscovering something it once knew well in another age. The idea of repeating civilizations is not comfortable. It places our modern world into a much larger frame. It suggests that the lights around us, the digital networks, the engines, the satellites, the fragile systems that hold our societies together, may not be unprecedented triumphs, but echoes of achievements long buried. And echoes fade. If Earth has hosted 6 civilizations before ours, then the question becomes unavoidable. What brought each of them to an end? Was it water? Was it fire? Was it cold? Was it something they unleashed themselves? And more importantly, if we are the seventh, what forces are gathering around us now? Deeper questions wait ahead. Evidence of floods that wiped continents clean, ash layers from eruptions that blotted out the sky, sudden freezes that reset entire ecosystems, and throughout all of it, the recurring memory of something that came before. Across every continent and every surviving ancient tradition, there is a memory that refuses to fade. Long before written history, long before the rise of kingdoms and empires, people spoke of a time when the world changed suddenly and without mercy. They described years when the sun dimmed, when the sky took on strange colours, when storms arrived without warning, and when the oceans rose to swallow everything familiar. These stories should not be identical. They come from cultures divided by languages, oceans, and thousands of years. And yet the details align with unnerving precision. In the highlands of Peru, legends recall a season of darkness so complete that people could not see their own hands. In the deserts of Australia, the oldest oral traditions speak of a burning rain that fell from the sky. In Sumerian tablets, the world ends in a flood so massive it erases cities. In the Pacific Islands, chants describe the ocean rising up like an animal with a mind of its own. Norse sagas echo a long winter that felt like death itself. Even in the Americas, far from the old world, stories from ancient tribes describe a sky that turned the colour of iron and a storm of ash that blanketed the earth. For centuries, scholars called these tales metaphors, symbols, allegories for moral lessons. But geology tells a different story. Ice cores drilled from Antarctica and Greenland contain thin black layers of ash at nearly the same depth, marking a time when volcanic eruptions blanketed the sky. The climate shifted in a geological instant. Temperatures fell, light dimmed, crops withered, species vanished, and then, as if to compound the devastation, glaciers collapsed and oceans surged upward with terrifying speed. The Younger Dryas event, the Toba eruption, sudden meltwater pulses, impact winters, each of these shifts left their fingerprints in stone and sediment. They also left their imprint in something far harder to trace: human memory. When cultures that never met each other describe the same catastrophe, when they speak of cities lost beneath the waves and a darkness that lasted years, it becomes difficult to dismiss all of it as imagination. Something happened, something global, something powerful enough to rewrite the surface of the planet. The most chilling element of these stories is how suddenly the world seems to have changed. There is no slow decline in the layers of sediment, no gradual fading of flora or fauna. Instead, there are abrupt transitions. One layer holds evidence of a stable world. The next layer contains signs of fire, flood, chemical imbalance, or catastrophic cooling. It is as if the planet turned a page in an instant and began a new chapter. In some stories, survivors flee to the mountains. In others, they build boats. In many, they are guided by voices or visions or memories that feel older than they are. There is often a chosen group, a remnant instructed to preserve knowledge for the world that will come after the darkness passes. Whether these tales are literal or symbolic, they reveal a shared human instinct, the sense that the end of one age is the seed of another. More unsettling still are the descriptions of cities submerged beneath the sea, temples swallowed overnight, towers lost to waves taller than any storm surge known today, entire cultures gone without a trace. For most of history, these accounts were dismissed as exaggeration, but as sonar mapping improves and divers descend into deeper waters, more structures emerge from the shadows. Stone platforms, staircases, walls, and geometric layouts lying exactly where the old stories said the oceans consumed them. And there is another pattern hidden within these myths. They do not simply mourn the destruction, they hint at what existed before the catastrophe. Some speak of an age of brightness when knowledge was abundant. Others speak of machines that hummed like living things. A few describe cities that glowed at night without fire. They whisper of a world older than ours, a world that rose to great heights before falling into silence. These stories do not prove that ancient civilizations were advanced, but they do prove that ancient people were trying to remember something they believed was real. They carried fragments of memory across millennia through songs, carvings, and rituals. Even as the details shifted, the core remained intact, a flood that reshaped the world, a darkness that lasted years, and the belief that something extraordinary existed before it. If humanity had lived through such events once, it might simply be myth. But if the Earth has passed through multiple cycles of fire and flood, if each cycle resets the world, then the stories begin to look less like imagination and more like warnings written in the only language that could survive the fall. Ahead lies a deeper question. If these floods and ash clouds erased earlier civilizations, what physical traces of those worlds might still lie hidden beneath the oceans? And more importantly, who or what went to such lengths to ensure those traces remained buried? If the great floods and ash clouds were powerful enough to sweep entire civilizations from the surface of the Earth, then the first place we should expect to find their remnants is not on land, but beneath the oceans. Coastlines have shifted dramatically over the last 100,000 years. Entire continental shelves that once held rivers, valleys, and cities now lie beneath hundreds of feet of water. And when we finally look down into those drowned worlds, what we find does not resemble nature at all. Across the Pacific, the Indian Ocean, and the scattered archipelagos between Asia and Australia, there are structures that defy geological explanation. They rise from the seafloor like the ghosts of forgotten cities. Terraces cut with straight lines. Stone blocks fitted so precisely that a knife blade cannot slide between them. Staircases that descend into deeper darkness. Flat plazas that stretch wider than modern city streets. All of it sitting in places that were once dry land during the last glacial era. One of the most striking examples lies off the coast of Japan near Yonaguni Island. At first glance, it appears to be a collapsed sandstone formation, but when divers trace its angles, something else becomes clear. Nature does not carve symmetrical terraces. Nature does not create sets of parallel steps rising with measured precision, and nature certainly does not produce a pyramid-shaped platform perfectly aligned to the cardinal directions. The deeper divers go, the more the structure behaves like architecture. Wide boulevards, carved drainage channels, massive retaining walls. Features that indicate planning, engineering, and purpose. Across the Indian Ocean, another site casts an even longer shadow: Dwarka, the sunken city described in ancient Sanskrit texts. For generations, its existence was dismissed as legend. Yet when sonar teams scanned the waters near Gujarat's coast, they discovered a grid of walls and foundations 5 miles wide. Carved stone columns lie toppled across the seabed. Sculpted artifacts rest half buried in silt. And most striking of all, the geometry of the city matches descriptions written thousands of years ago. Ancient writers spoke of a port city of unparalleled beauty that vanished beneath the sea in a single night. It was not a metaphor. It was a memory. Even farther south on the vast Sunda Shelf, sonar sweeps reveal straight channels and rectangular depressions too perfect to be natural. Many of these features lie between Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand, in waters that would have been fertile ground for early civilizations before the melting of the last ice age. Researchers have identified what appear to be causeways, harbour basins, and foundations large enough to support monumental architecture. Yet these structures are rarely discussed in mainstream archaeology. Most are labelled geological oddities or simply ignored. The pattern does not end there. Off the coast of Cuba, deep-sea scanners detected massive stone blocks arranged in patterns resembling city streets. Near the Bahamas, the Bimini Road remains the subject of debate, its stones too uniform and too deliberately placed for erosion alone. And along many continental shelves the world over, Fishermen occasionally pull up carved stone fragments in their nets, lonely remnants of structures long since drowned. What makes all of this more compelling is how closely the locations match the flood stories from dozens of cultures. Indigenous Australians speak of coastal lands swallowed by rising seas. Polynesian navigators recount island chains that vanished beneath waves. Indigenous groups of Southeast Asia tell of journeys inland after the ocean rose higher than any ancestor had seen. These stories are not metaphoric invention. They are historical memory stretched across thousands of years. But the most intriguing question is not how these cities were built. It is why they were forgotten. If such places existed, if they represented real cultures with real engineering skill, why did every trace of them vanish with such completeness? A city can flood, but knowledge does not disappear so easily, unless something more powerful than rising water erased it. Something that targeted not just structures, but entire networks of culture, language, and continuity. Something that forced humanity to begin again from the ashes, stripped of memory. Another unsettling pattern emerges when examining how nations respond to these sites. Regions with the most promising underwater ruins often become unexpectedly restricted. Diving zones close without explanation. Research permits go unanswered. Sonar data disappears behind government walls. The justification varies: environmental protection, maritime safety, military oversight, but the effect is the same. The deeper a site appears to challenge accepted history, the less accessible it becomes. These drowned kingdoms do not merely hint at lost civilizations. They challenge the foundation of the timeline itself. If these cities existed before the last great floods, if they were built before the world drowned its coastlines, then human civilization is not 12,000 years old. It is far older, staggered across multiple rises and collapses like footprints fading into the deep. And yet there is another layer to this mystery. Not everything lost to the sea stayed lost. Some traces of these ancient cultures did not disappear into the abyss. They survived, not in stone or metal, but in the bodies of the descendants who escaped the floods. Which leads us into the next question, one that ventures not into the ocean, but into our own DNA. Long before archaeology uncovered stone foundations beneath the oceans, long before sonar traced forgotten coastlines across the continental shelves, the most enduring evidence of earlier civilizations was already inside us. It lived quietly in the human genome, carried across generations like a message encoded in a bottle drifting through time. And only recently have researchers begun to understand what that message might be. Human DNA is a vast archive of trial, error, survival, and adaptation. Most genes follow predictable patterns shaped by climate, diet, disease, and migration. But every so often, scientists encounter an anomaly, a genetic signature that does not behave like any ordinary mutation. One of the strangest is a cluster of traits found in less than 0.5% of the global population. Too rare to be random, too consistent to be coincidence, and too unusual to fit neatly within the known branches of human ancestry. This cluster appears across groups that should have no connection, among certain highland communities of India, among isolated coastal tribes of Southeast Asia, among indigenous Australians in the far north, among the Basque people of Western Europe, and scattered lightly through a few populations that live near the remnants of submerged civilizations. These groups share no recent history, no common language, and no clear migratory link. Yet the same genetic markers appear in all of them. The traits themselves are extraordinary. Enhanced resistance to hypoxia, the ability to function with reduced oxygen levels, unusual endurance under physical strain, mild but measurable enhancements in spatial mapping regions of the brain, the very regions that process navigation, direction, and geometric understanding. What makes this even stranger is that these traits do not appear as separate adaptations. They appear together, bundled as if inherited from a shared ancestor. But it is the neurological component that draws the most attention. Brain imaging studies on individuals who carry this rare cluster show heightened activity in areas associated with memory encoding and environmental recognition. Not memory as in personal events, but memory as in inherited pattern detection, the instinctive ability to orient oneself in unfamiliar landscapes, to follow astronomical cues, to track seasonal changes with unusual accuracy. These abilities do not guarantee intelligence. They are closer to a quiet intuition, an internal compass that points not north or south, but towards something older. Some anthropologists suggest that these traits emerged from ancient populations living in high-altitude environments. Others propose that they arose from interbreeding with now extinct hominin groups. But these explanations falter because the genetic cluster appears where altitude is irrelevant, where archaic hominins did not exist, and where environmental factors do not justify such adaptations. Instead, the pattern aligns with something far older and far more fragile. It aligns with the survivors. Communities whose ancestors fled rising seas or falling ash or sudden darkness. Communities whose oral histories speak of journeys across drowned lands, of abandoned cities swallowed by water, of celestial knowledge passed down without understanding its origin. Communities that carry fragments of memory from worlds that no longer exist. The more scientists examine the cluster, the more unusual it becomes. One gene influences cellular repair in a way that resembles adaptations found in deep-diving mammals. Another alters metabolic efficiency during periods of low sunlight. A third shows hints of ancient selective pressure that does not match any known climate shift of the last 50,000 years. All of this suggests not only survival, but survival under extreme, cyclical, and catastrophic conditions. And then comes the most unsettling observation of all. The cluster is becoming more active. Epigenetic markers on these sequences show signs of awakening, as if environmental conditions are beginning to resemble those that shape the original carriers. Rising carbon dioxide levels, shifting magnetic fields, changing climate rhythms. It is almost as though the genome remembers something the conscious mind does not, a warning engraved in biology, preparing for a pattern that is returning. If earlier civilizations rose and fell, if the world reset itself again and again, then it makes sense that only the smallest human groups survived each collapse. Those who escaped were forced to adapt quickly, carrying the traits that allowed them to endure. Over tens of thousands of years, the majority of these markers faded, but a few survived, hidden deep within the genetic code, passed quietly from parent to child, waiting for the world to resemble the world that came before. This does not prove that ancient civilizations were advanced, but it proves something just as important, that humans today are not starting from zero. We carry echoes of ancient worlds in our bones, in our blood, in our instincts. The flood myths, the legends, the strange architectural alignments, the lost cities beneath the sea, these are not isolated mysteries. They are pieces of a single story, a story so old it rewrote itself into the genome of the people who lived through it. And now that we can read this code for the first time, the question is not whether earlier civilizations existed. The question is what they were capable of building and why so many of their creations were erased so completely. The ground where we walk holds clues, not just shattered fragments or submerged ruins, but structures so large and so precise they seem impossible for ancient cultures to create. Yet they stand, silent and immovable, pointing toward a past we no longer understand. Ahead lies the investigation of those giants in stone, the great structures that should not exist. For generations, the great monuments of the ancient world have been treated as triumphs of early civilization. The pyramids of Egypt, the megaliths of Peru, the vast geometric complexes of Mexico, the buried pyramid fields of China, the cyclopean walls scattered across Europe and Asia, all of them studied, admired, and continually reinterpreted. Yet the more carefully we look at these structures, the less they resemble the work of cultures rising from simplicity. Instead, they look like the last surviving remnants of a knowledge that did not begin with those civilizations, but ended with them. What makes these structures so perplexing is not simply their size. Humanity has always been capable of ambition. It is the precision that defies explanation. Stone blocks weighing dozens or even hundreds of tons are cut with accuracy that modern engineers struggle to reproduce. Faces align with astronomical markers down to fractions of a degree. Angles match celestial cycles that were supposedly unknown at the time. And the deeper we excavate the foundations of these monuments, the older the layers appear to be. Nowhere is this more evident than at the Giza Plateau. Beneath the familiar limestone casing of the Great Pyramid lies a core far stranger and far older than the surface suggests. The alignment to true north, the ratio of its dimensions, the geometry encoded in its internal passages all imply mathematical sophistication that should not have existed in the era of its official construction. Yet the pyramid stands not as a beginning, but as an echo. A monument whose surface may be younger, but whose design whispers of knowledge carried across a gulf of forgotten time. In South America, the story is similar. At Sacsayhuaman, the giant stone walls interlock like pieces of a puzzle, with no mortar, no gaps, and no consistent block size. Each stone is unique, shaped to fit the next so precisely that even modern laser mapping cannot fully explain the method used. The older layers lie beneath the Inca stonework, not above it. The Incas themselves claimed they did not build the foundation. They inherited it. Across the ocean, the pyramids of Teotihuacan reveal another anomaly. Their layout mirrors the orbital spacing of planets in the solar system. The Pyramid of the Sun sits atop a cave modified into a perfect clover-shaped chamber. The avenue connecting the structures aligns not with a solstice, but with the setting point of a specific star during a distant epoch. Whoever designed the city planned it with knowledge of the heavens far beyond the needs of an early agrarian society. In China, entire pyramid fields remain hidden beneath forested hills, officially classified as burial mounds, but shaped with geometric exactness. Many are oriented towards celestial events no longer visible due to changes in Earth's axial tilt. And beneath several of these mounds, ground-penetrating scans reveal chambers constructed of stone blocks cut with the same precision seen in megalithic sites across the world. The similarities are not superficial, they are structural, foundational, intrinsic. Regardless of location, era, or culture, the oldest layers of the greatest monuments share the same characteristics: enormous stones, interlocking joints, astronomical alignments, and an architectural style that feels learned rather than invented. It is as though every culture that rose after a great collapse found fragments of something older and used those fragments as models. They rebuilt what they could remember. They imitated what they did not understand, and what they created became the monuments that puzzled us for centuries. If all of these structures were simply the product of ingenuity, we would expect to find a clear evolutionary path of construction. Yet there is none. The oldest structures are the most precise. The youngest often decline in accuracy. Techniques do not improve over time. They fade. This inversion is not natural. Technology does not regress without cause. It regresses when knowledge is lost. Another clue lies in the positioning of these monuments. Many stand along fault lines where telluric currents concentrate. Others sit atop geological formations rich in quartz, basalt, or magnetic minerals. Some align with global grids that remain unexplained. It appears these ancient builders were not simply creating temples or tombs. They were constructing something functional, something energetic, something that interacted with the Earth itself. Whether they served as observatories, resonators, power stations, or markers of an older world is uncertain. But what is certain is that the cultures historians credit with building these structures did not possess the necessary tools, techniques, or knowledge. At least not according to the official story. Yet the monuments exist. The challenge always returns to the same question. If earlier civilizations built these foundations, where did they go? What force erased nearly everything except the stones too heavy to destroy? The answer may lie not in the ruins we can see, but in the clues those ruins point toward. Clues that suggest Earth has not hosted one civilization, but many, each rising higher than the last before vanishing into silence. And if 6 worlds came before ours, leaving only these fractured remnants, then the next mystery becomes unavoidable. What ended each of them? And what does that mean for us now? Ahead lies the deeper exploration of those vanished cultures, the civilizations erased before, and the patterns hidden within their rise and fall. If the monuments that still stand on the surface of our world are echoes of something older, then the civilizations that built the originals must have risen and fallen long before recorded history. Yet unlike modern societies, which leave behind metals, plastics, and digital ghosts, these earlier worlds appear only in fleeting geological signatures, fragments of tools, and memories preserved through myth. Their outlines are faint, but when placed together they begin to reveal a pattern far more complex than the simple story of humanity rising once from primitive origins. The first of these forgotten civilizations appears in what is now Southeast Asia, during a time when the Sunda Shelf formed a vast landmass connecting the islands of Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand. This region, now largely underwater, contains evidence of ancient river systems, fertile plains, and long coastlines perfect for early settlement. Geologists estimate that tens of millions of people could have lived there before rising seas consumed the land. If this culture mastered agriculture and coastal engineering, their disappearance in a catastrophic flood would explain both the silence in the archaeological record and the flood myths that originated across the surrounding continents. Another civilization seems to have thrived in what is now the Sahara Desert, back when it was a green expanse filled with lakes, rivers, and thriving ecosystems. Ancient rock art from the region depicts boats, cattle, and human gatherings that resemble organized societies. And beneath the sands, radar scanning has revealed geometric shapes and buried structures that hint at large settlements. This civilization may have been the bridge linking early African, Mediterranean, and Mesopotamian cultures, a hub of activity erased when the desert expanded and consumed everything in its path. Far to the north, the region between Siberia and Alaska, known as Beringia, offers yet another clue. During the last ice age, it was a temperate grassland supporting vast herds of megafauna and the human populations that hunted them. But what is rarely discussed is the scale of this landmass and its potential for early development. Beringia was not merely a migration route, it was a homeland, a place where unique adaptations emerged, perhaps even technologies suited to cold climates and large animal management. When sea levels rose, the entire region vanished beneath the Bering Strait, leaving behind only scattered genetic hints among northern populations. In the Indus Valley, ruins like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa show signs of an advanced urban culture that seems to have appeared almost fully formed. Their grid layouts, drainage systems, uniform brick sizes, and standardized weights suggest a civilization inheriting knowledge rather than inventing it. And beneath the visible ruins lie older layers, less understood, hinting at a pre-existing culture that may have carried forward traditions from an even earlier age. Across the Mediterranean, the islands of Crete, Cyprus, Sardinia, and Malta contain ruins so old and complex they defy placement on the accepted timeline. Some structures feature stonework reminiscent of sites thousands of miles away, suggesting a maritime culture with far-reaching influence. Massive harbour installations imply sophisticated navigation, trade networks, and possibly technologies that allowed them to manipulate coastal environments. The collapse of these cultures coincides with abrupt climate events, volcanic eruptions, and sudden sea level changes. The sixth and perhaps most enigmatic civilization may have risen within the Amazon basin. Beneath the dense canopy, LiDAR scans reveal sprawling networks of roads, mounds, canals, and geometric earthworks extending for hundreds of miles. The scale suggests not small villages, but a coordinated society capable of landscape engineering on a vast scale. If their knowledge revolved around biological systems, agriculture, or environmental harmony, their collapse may be tied to climate shifts, disease, or drought, leaving behind a jungle that swallowed their accomplishments. What connects all six civilizations is not simply their disappearance, but the abruptness of their endings. They do not fade slowly from history. They vanish in geological instants. Floods, volcanic winters, sudden freezes, megadroughts, cosmic impacts, the precise cause varies, but the timing remains eerily consistent with Earth's natural cycles. Periods of stability lasting thousands of years end in moments of chaos that erase nearly everything. In each cycle, the survivors scatter. They carry fragments of knowledge with them, pieces of language, memory, and skill that reappear centuries later in cultures that seem far too advanced for their age. They rebuild what they can. They imitate what they lost. And eventually a new civilization rises in the ashes of the old, never realizing it is only the next chapter in a much older story. If this interpretation is correct, then we are not the first to stand at the height of development. We are merely the latest. 6 times the world has climbed toward complexity. 6 times it has been forced to begin again. And now, as modern humanity stands on the edge of unprecedented global change, the question grows increasingly difficult to ignore. What ended those worlds? And why does the pattern appear to be returning? Because if Earth truly operates on a cycle of rise and fall, then our own position in that cycle becomes the most important mystery of all. Ahead lies the investigation of forces that may have erased those ancient civilizations, forces capable of sweeping away entire ages and leaving behind only faint traces for us to discover thousands of years later. As the outlines of earlier civilizations grow sharper, another pattern begins to emerge, one that has nothing to do with geology or archaeology, and everything to do with human behavior. It shows itself in the way discoveries vanish, in the way institutions respond, and in the way certain pieces of evidence are quietly removed from public reach. For every anomaly uncovered in stone or sediment, there seems to be an equal and opposite effort to obscure it. Researchers who study forbidden timelines speak of a phenomenon they call the disappearing trail. A diver maps a submerged structure, but the images are confiscated before they can be published. A university team announces the discovery of a site that predates known civilization, and within weeks funding is cut, access is restricted, and the story is reframed as a misinterpretation. Museum archives contain artifacts that were once displayed openly but now sit in unmarked drawers without catalogue numbers or provenance records. Even satellites occasionally sweep over regions of interest only for the resulting data to vanish behind digital walls. These incidents are often dismissed as administrative mistakes, bureaucratic reshuffling, or simple coincidence. But coincidences rarely form repeating patterns, and here the pattern is unmistakable. The older the discovery, the more precise the craftsmanship, the more advanced the implied technology, the faster it disappears from public view. Why does this happen? There are several possibilities, each unsettling in its own way. One possibility is institutional inertia. Entire academic fields are built upon the idea that civilization began recently. If evidence surfaces that contradicts this, it threatens careers, theories, textbooks, and the foundations of long-accepted narratives. It is easier to bury anomalies than rewrite the story. Another possibility is national interest. Underwater ruins often lie near strategic coastlines. Ancient structures built on geological hotspots could have implications for energy research, military technology, or mineral exploration. Governments have a long history of classifying anything that might offer a competitive advantage, but there is a third possibility, one that aligns uncomfortably well with the global consistency of disappearance. It is the idea that the suppression is organized not to protect nations, but to protect stability itself. Because if the public learned that 6 civilizations rose before us, that each one reached a height similar to or beyond our own, and that each one collapsed abruptly, the implications would be profound. It would mean our modern world is not unique. It would mean our technologies are not unprecedented. It would mean we are vulnerable to the same cyclical forces that erased those earlier ages. In this view, the suppression is not malicious. It is preventative. Those in power may believe they are shielding society from panic, protecting economies from collapse, and buying time until humanity is prepared to confront the reality of its place in the cycle. Such a perspective, while paternalistic, is not impossible. History is filled with examples of elites choosing silence over revelation. If such groups exist, whether formal councils, loose networks of researchers, or hidden committees within governments, their influence appears in the same places. Restricted access to ruins, classified satellite data, sudden closures of archaeological sites, research papers withdrawn without explanation, funding redirected away from anything that threatens the accepted timeline. The pattern is global, not confined to any nation or political ideology. And the strangest part is this: the suppression often begins before a discovery can even be analysed. It is as though someone somewhere recognises the significance far faster than any academic committee could. Sonar scans flagged before divers reach the water. Excavation permits denied before soil is disturbed. Digital records wiped minutes after anomalies appear in public archives. Such efficiency suggests preparedness, a standing protocol waiting to be triggered. This raises a deeper question. If these earlier civilizations did exist, if their ruins lie beneath the oceans and their memories survive only in scattered myths, who else has known this? Did the survivors of the last cycle warn their descendants? Did remnants of their knowledge pass secretly through priesthoods, guilds, or esoteric societies? Is the modern suppression not the beginning of concealment, but the continuation of a tradition thousands of years old? These are dangerous ideas, but they align with the consistency of the silence. If someone has spent generations protecting humanity from the truth of its past, then perhaps they believe the past contains not just knowledge but danger, something powerful enough to erase entire worlds, something we may be approaching again, because the final pattern, the one that makes all the others meaningful, is the recurrence of collapse. Every prior civilization appears to have ended abruptly. Every cycle aligns with geological upheaval. And as we examine our own era, the same signals begin to appear once more. If knowledge of these cycles has been hidden, then the last question to ask is the most important one of all. What does the past say about our future? Ahead lies the final movement in this journey, the coming of the next cycle, and the signs that it may already be unfolding. If the traces of 6 forgotten worlds lie scattered beneath our feet, and if the 7th is the one we now call modern humanity, then every clue gathered along this investigation points toward a single, inescapable conclusion. We are not at the beginning of our story. We are standing at the threshold of its next chapter. The 8th civilization is not something waiting in the distant future. It is something already forming in the cracks of the present. Earth does not change suddenly without warning. It offers signs subtle at first, then unmistakable for those who have learned to read them. Shifts in magnetic patterns, abrupt climate oscillations, rising oceans, the weakening of long stable currents in the atmosphere and the sea. These transitions mirror the same markers that preceded earlier collapses, and they are happening again in our lifetime. Not on the scale of centuries, but on the scale of decades. Carbon dioxide levels now exceed anything seen throughout the known history of humanity. Storms grow in frequency and ferocity. Ice sheets fracture at accelerated rates. Entire ecosystems shift their ranges in a single human generation. These changes are presented as environmental issues, scientific models, or political debates. But viewed in the context of the long-forgotten cycles, they appear instead as something more ancient and more cyclical, the beginning of another great turning. If earlier civilizations were destroyed by floods, ash, cold, or heat, then our own age carries echoes of all of these threats at once. Ocean levels creep upward toward the coastlines where most of humanity now lives. Volcanic fields show renewed activity. The magnetic field continues to drift and weaken. Heat waves break records year after year. The signs do not guarantee catastrophe, but they mirror the patterns of earlier collapses with unnerving accuracy. Yet even as the world tilts toward instability, something else stirs a counterforce rising not in nature, but in humanity itself. The rare genetic cluster carried by scattered populations across the globe, the strange inheritance of survivors from earlier cycles, is awakening. Epigenetic studies reveal increased activity in metabolic pathways once tied to endurance under extreme climatic stress. Neurological markers associated with spatial memory and environmental awareness show heightened development in younger generations. It is as though the descendants of the ancient survivors feel the cycle returning through instincts deeper than conscious thought. At the same time, technologies are emerging that resemble shadows of the lost ages, not in form, but in function. We rediscover solar energy just as earlier civilizations seem to harness the sun. We explore biological computing, echoing the Amazonian earthworks that once shaped entire ecosystems. We unlock the power of artificial intelligence, perhaps mirroring the forgotten mechanisms hinted at in the geologic record and the surviving myths of self-operating machines. It is possible that innovation in each age is not invention, but memory resurfacing. Cities rise higher, networks grow denser, information flows freely across continents. Humanity reorganizes itself into something more interconnected than ever before. These developments are often framed as progress, yet they may also be symptoms of a species unconsciously preparing for a new cycle. Each civilization rises swiftly near its end, as though pushed by forces it does not understand, driven to reach some threshold before the turning arrives. But the most profound question is not whether the eighth civilization will rise. It is whether it will survive. Every prior cycle ended abruptly. Knowledge scattered, cities drowned, landscapes rewritten. Only fragments endured through the survivors, who carried memory in their blood and stories. Our cycle may not be different unless our response is different. We possess something none of the earlier civilizations had the ability to see the pattern, to look back across geological time, to examine the remnants of earlier worlds, to understand that collapse is not random but rhythmic, and to prepare not with fear but with awareness. The eighth civilization could be the first to break the pattern, the first to anticipate the turning, the first to protect its knowledge rather than lose it, the first to build with the understanding that nothing on Earth is permanent except change itself. But for that to happen, humanity must confront its true timeline. It must understand that it stands atop the ruins of many worlds, inheriting both the triumphs and the mistakes of those forgotten ages. It must move forward with humility, curiosity, and the willingness to rewrite everything we thought we knew. If we succeed, the eighth civilization may rise into an age unlike any before. If we fail, we will become another silent layer in the earth, another whisper in myth, another lost world waiting to be rediscovered thousands of years from now. The cycle is returning. The signs are here. And the future will be shaped not by those who deny the past, but by those who dare to see it clearly. If this journey into our forgotten past has resonated with you, consider staying with us as we search for what comes next. A like, a share, or a subscription helps this story reach those who may also be looking for answers in the dark. Thank you for walking with us through the echoes of lost worlds. Until the next night, rest well.